Alrighty, so I'm here with Jamie Coutts. How are you, Jamie?
I'm doing well.
Pull that mic up a little bit closer so you can hang it off the table.
Okay.
Okay, so Jamie and I, we met when I was speaking at a few of these United Australia Party events, but it was something that you said to me at one of the last events where, we sort of saw each other again, and you said, Johnny, I heard you speak at the first event up in Warringah. I think it was at the Ivanhoe, was it?
First time I heard you speak was at the Warringah branch office in Mossman.
Oh, okay, in Mossman, okay. And then, and you said, you sounded so passionate, and for you, it was like, it made you feel like, wow, like, somebody can be so passionate about something. It sort of inspired you to be a bit more engaged with it as well.
Well, it wasn't just that. Actually, the thing that really struck me was that, I guess I've been away from Australia for 20 years.
Yep.
I've been living overseas in Asia and London. Just got back, and I do feel like obviously Australia's changed a lot.
Yep.
Looks, but also the feel.
Yep.
And the thing that really struck me about the presentation, just that ad hoc speech you gave at the Mossman office, was how much passion you have for this country. And I think I'd asked you maybe in a follow-up meeting, like, were you born here?
Yep.
What generation are you? I wanted to understand your heritage.
Yep.
Because it doesn't matter to me whether you are an immigrant, a new immigrant, or whether you're third generation or whether you're sixth generation.
Yep.
But I'm always impressed by those that are relatively new or newer to the country than, say, the heritage where I come from, speak so passionately about this great country. And it was also a contrast of what I unfortunately am seeing happen in this country, with a lot of complacency exhibited by certain segments of the population, and a totally different vibe coming from more of the the immigrants or the second generation, third generation folks that have come in from, whether it's Eastern Europe or whether it's the Middle East or whether it's Asia or whether it's Africa. And I find it inspiring because you are really that next generation. And I think a lot of us can sort of take a lot of confidence from, hearing someone like yourself speak about this country and wanting to defend it and wanting to really, help it prosper. So that was what really struck me. And I think I mentioned that at the follow-up event up in Manly, a couple of weeks later.
Yeah. All right. So why we decided to get together is because Jamie at the Mossman office, I remember now actually, Jamie raised some really great points from a financial aspect, and there was a whole crypto rabbit hole that we could have gone down, but we said okay, we'll save that conversation, right? And we're going to go hopefully down that crypto rabbit hole today. But I guess before we get to that, how about we pull it all back, Jamie? And so obviously you grew up in Australia.
Pretty much. I wasn't born here.
Oh, where were you born?
I was actually born in an island which I'm sure you never would have heard of, for very good reason. I think it's like the sixth smallest country in the world. Back then it wasn't a country. The name of the place is called Niue. It's located in between Tonga and Samoa.
Niue, okay.
And it's an island with a population of 2,000 people.
Okay.
It's since become a country. It used to be a protectorate of New Zealand back in the day, like in the 70s and 80s. These scattered islands throughout the Pacific were usually being looked after by Australia or New Zealand, sort of a holdover from the British colonial days. Since then, they've all become independent, so it was just really a transitioning phase. And during that phase, my dad, who happened to be Australian, got a job with the New Zealand government because he met my mum in New Zealand.
Okay.
And they got stationed. He was the accountant or the treasurer for the island during that time, and we spent like 2 years there. I happened to be born there. I don't remember any of it, unfortunately. It was supposed to be like this tropical, like this. It's an atoll, so it was like a tropical paradise. My brother was 6; he was a couple of years older than me.
Okay,
and he remembers it. He remembers it like the best memories of his life.
Wow.
Climbing coconut trees with all his friends in school, and going for swims in the beach and catching fish and stuff, and I don't remember any of that. But then we left. We lived in New Zealand for 2 years, and then we moved to Australia in 1980 when I was 3. And my memories are starting from like Australia on. So Australia's all I know.
Yep. Okay. So, wow. Okay. So Niue, I've never heard of that island. I can't, but with a population size of 2,000, it'll be a pretty strong community, I would say. And I'm guessing it's not a huge island, right? Like.
No, you can walk across it, I think, in like less than a day.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. Wait, so would they have airstrips there, or how would you get there? It would be by boat, wouldn't it?
No, you could fly, but you'd have to fly into American Samoa, right, and then catch a charter flight or a boat across from there.
Yeah. Okay.
But yeah, nothing direct. There are now from New Zealand, maybe Auckland, but like it's still just a speck on the on the map.
Yeah. Okay. So then, what are your first memories of growing up then? So from the age of 3 on, you're in Australia. Were you in Sydney then, or
no? We moved to Brisbane.
Brisbane. Okay.
Yeah. So I grew up in Brisbane all my life until I left to go overseas in 2003. First memories, I don't know, just like scattered images of of certain family events and functions and whatnot. Things became a little bit clearer. I guess my first real memories are sort of preschool and then first year of school.
Yeah.
Pretty standard stuff.
Yeah.
Like learning it. Remember being taught what's left and right, and left for me always has this color association of blue.
Yeah.
Because I don't know if they do this with every school. I've never really asked anyone, but when they were teaching us left and right, it was like there was the left-hand side of the chalkboard had a blue color with left and then right. So, this just
interesting
things like that.
No, I don't think that not every school does that. So when I learnt my left and right, I've got a mark on my palm, a little mole, and I believe that this mark actually came because I was naughty as a kid and I was playing with the door or something and jammed my hand in the door. And that is my memento of being that naughty kid, right? And so when I was learning my left and rights, that was how I learnt it, was to go, okay, which is the messed up hand, the hand with the mark on it, and that's the right hand. So
well, the other one is L. You can put L for left. But yeah, I've never really even asked anyone how they actually learned that, so that's interesting.
Yeah. Okay. And so then in primary school, like what kind of kid were you? How would you describe yourself?
Oh man, jeez, do we really want to know this?
Yeah, of course we do.
I think generally I was a pretty good kid, but I was, I was definitely a shit at times.
Yeah.
I got up to a bit of mischief early days. Nothing too serious, but I had I did have a streak which had a problem with authority.
Yep.
But I was never really out of control because I had fairly disciplined views and ambitions, and I wanted to get to university and things like that. So, but it got me into trouble a bit once I was in sort of high school with teachers and administration. One classic example was that I was actually getting tutored by my best friend at the time, who was number one in the seniors year the year before, and he was basically dux of the school for all the humanities subjects, and he was tutoring me, so I was submitting, and that was because I was desperate to get my grades up so I could go and do economics at university. That'd be right. I've not turned off my.
It's all right. These things happen.
Can you tell it's my first podcast? Anyway, so I was doing, I thought I was writing at least pretty good B grade, if not A grade type essays. And my marks were coming in continually quite poor. And anyway, I contested, and I remember it erupted one day with one teacher because she was claiming that I was accusing her of all sorts of impropriety, but I did actually point out that that it was pretty unfair, and I wondered if it would be different if we would be able to submit our papers with only our student number,
so that they didn't know who the person was,
and anonymize it.
Yep.
And that caused a huge ruckus, and then I was pulled up to the headmaster's office, and I had a dressing down and whatnot. Anyway, next year they put in student numbers. So it was always like little things like that where I could see there was some sort of injustice or unfairness in the system, and I wanted to expose it at every possible chance.
Yeah, well, that's a great way to do it. I never really thought about that, in terms of favorable treatment or unfavorable treatment from teachers. I was a shit. Like, I was a little shit. I think in kindergarten, it was either in kindergarten or year one, I got in trouble because your little juice box, the poppers, I'd somehow worked out with the other kids that, you know, when you finish them, if you blow them up and then you jump on them, they pop.
Yep.
Right. And so, you know, here we were popping our poppers. And then I think, you know, one day I decided that I would pop my full juice box, and it just went all over the wall. And I got in trouble for that. And I think I got in trouble quite a bit in primary school, you know, to the point where, you know, the teachers had said to my mum, you know, like, what do you feed him? Like, are you giving him red cordial? Like, why is he like this? Like,
so just hyperactivity.
Yeah. So they pretty much, you know, suggested that I had ADD or ADHD, and you know, wanted to get me on Ritalin, and you know, my mum, being a typical Asian mum, is like, he doesn't need drugs.
Yeah. How far in it would have been? And I don't know when was this, in the 90s or?
So yeah, I was born in 84. So
okay.
So yeah, I would have started school in 89 or something like that. 89 or 99. Yeah.
Yeah. The start of the drug era. Yeah, I sort of missed that. So there was definitely no drugs being handed out to kids, but it was only a couple of years after I had sort of gone through school that whole thing became a thing.
Yep.
Like medicating young children.
Yep.
For, I don't know, just being kids, which seems crazy to me.
Yeah, like so I think you're my brother's era. So my brother's 7 years older than me. So you're what, around 77?
Yeah, 78.
78. So there you go. So you're my brother's era. So, you know, it was interesting for me growing up and having a brother that was 7 years older, because I could sort of, I always like to tack onto the things that he was into.
Right.
Which, you know, is cool when you're the younger kid. Probably not so cool for him as the older brother.
No, definitely not.
And well, you got a brother that yourself that's older, right?
So. Yeah, so 6 years older. So same thing. Like I was the little brat, and I mean he entertained me and allowed me to sort of tag along. But yeah, I was more of a burden than anything else for him.
Yeah. Okay. So then, you know, when you got to high school and you're having these troubles with the teachers, did that all settle down, or was it your outlook that changed, or like, I guess, you know, how did that sort of fizzle out, or it didn't?
Well, I'll be honest. I think I subdued it for a long time. I mean, school was a really sort of rebellious period, but I still, you know, muddled through and got my grades and went to university, and that was a massive muddle through. Like, I didn't do well at university. I didn't necessarily try that hard either. But I got sort of, I don't know why, I think it was just general laziness and a malaise. I think it's hilarious right now, right? So I'm obviously in my 40s, and I don't know, since the mid-30s, I've had this insatiable thirst for knowledge.
Yep.
When I got to university, I just saw it as like tick boxes, when actually it was the prime time to learn.
Yep.
So there's been a lot of catch up.
Yep.
And that's held me back in a couple of areas, but it's also, I don't know, I've also thought about this as well. Like, once you get older, whether you're more attuned or able to take in information or different information better than you could when you were sort of at that younger age, because you've got, dare I say, God, I know I'm getting more age and experience, right?
Yeah.
So I kind of just, you know, I became pretty narrow when looking for career opportunity, make money, all that sort of boring stuff. So I think the whole problem with authority sort of died down. It definitely made a resurgence in the last 10 years.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's interesting. So I kind of just muddled through after that. And then, you know, went on the career track. But that only lasted like 5 years. It's funny because I made a promise to myself that I was going to go overseas and travel as soon as I possibly could. So once I finished university, I started making plans for that, and then the universe had other ideas, and I got a job. I had no idea what I really wanted to do, but I got a job, and I knew it was in a good firm, and I knew it was a good opportunity, so I shelved all the ideas about traveling. But after 4 years, I made plans, and then I went. Yeah, you know, and I ticked that box. I sort of, you know.
All right, well, we'll talk about that a little bit more. I want to go back one step, because you mentioned that you had, you know, that you had plans in terms of, you know, that you wanted to go to uni and you wanted to study. So a lot of the times, you know, people go through high school, they have no idea what they want to do, Right. So for you, did you actually have an idea what you wanted to study, or was it just you just wanted to get a degree, tick the box?
Yeah, I just wanted to get a degree. I didn't know what I was going to do with it. The things that I was interested in, the things I did well at school were economics.
Yep.
Like that for me was a really interesting area, which I did pretty well at, and it came easy. So I pursued that strain. I worked my butt off to get into the top maths class, and then I had to take tutoring just to basically keep up. So there was, it was obviously I was much more better suited at, certain things, humanities type subjects. But the curious thing is I find maths and quantitative finance so much more interesting now, whereas before I used to like steer away from it.
Yep.
But I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I remember thinking, you know what, I'd love to be a historian. History and economics like sort of go hand in hand. And history was easy.
Yep.
Really easy. So I thought I'd love to be a historian. And back in the 90s, I was thinking, I see those dudes. They're in tweed jackets and they're incredibly boring.
Yep.
And they probably don't get paid much. So to hell with that. I'm not going to be a historian.
Yeah.
So I sort of tried to find something in finance where I could sort of use that knowledge. And I didn't know what I wanted to do. I was really scrambling after university. I remember like literally just answering or ringing in for jobs from anything in the sort of in the classifieds, in the jobs comps, because I had no idea. I had no preparation in that final year of like doing what do you call it? Candidate, forget the terms now, but like job entry sort of stuff within firms. So I got out and I was like lost. But at the same time, I was thinking, I'm going to go overseas.
Yep.
Then I tried to look for jobs, didn't know what I wanted to do. Universe opened up and basically someone suggested, why don't you go to this really well-known stockbroking firm in Brisbane run by this guy called Porky Morgan.
Porky Morgan.
Who was an absolute character.
Okay.
Paul Morgan.
Yep.
Who ran Morgan Stockbroking, which has been absorbed into many different stockbroking firms, has rolled up into probably Bell Potter now. I can't remember, which is, I think, last part of UBS.
Yep.
Anyway, he owned the Broncos at one point. So he was a famous entrepreneur in Queensland.
Yep.
So it was a big fish in a small pond, but he was legendary. And I walked in and basically asked if I could just sit on the desk and learn from you guys, not get paid or anything, and use it as a an introduction to stockbroking, because I was quite interested. He was like, "Yeah, go for it." Gave me a few guardrails, what I can and can't do. Make sure I get the coffees, make sure I get the teas. But basically just sit around and through osmosis, learn what I can. And, maybe in 6 months' time, he said, we'll give you a job.
Yep.
Which is, that was back in the day when that sort of stuff happened. I'm not even sure that would happen anymore. But, so I did that. And, but I was there for like 2 months, rocking up like 3 days a week, just sitting around and basically trying to absorb what I could. And a job did come up at another stockbroking firm, which at the time was Credit Suisse, back on the Gold Coast. And I went for that and I got it. And next thing you know, I was moving down to the Gold Coast to become a stockbroker.
Yeah,
3 months before, I didn't even know what stockbroking was.
Yep.
I didn't know what I was going to do, and I was probably going to go overseas. And that put me on the career path that I've been on ever since, with a few intermissions and breaks.
So, from the time that you spent, I guess, volunteering, so to speak, at Porky Morgan's stockbroking firm, were there any standout lessons that you learnt from your time there?
Don't say anything unless you've got really something important to contribute.
Mm-hmm. Is there a story behind that? So, did you speak out of turn or something and get...
No, I don't think I ever did. I just knew that it was not my time, and why should it be? I knew nothing.
Yep.
I knew that there was a time to learn and absorb, and I tried to as much as possible. So that was at first. The other thing was really how to sort of interact with, adults in a, in sort of very mature topics.
Yep.
And the conversations were light, but they were very heavy at times as well. So that's what I remember from that experience. And I guess something looking back on it now, I didn't think it at the time. Looking back on it now is like, you you never know unless you try. You never know, you'll never get anything unless you ask. And I asked for that, like just that job or that no paid job, which for them was no risk, but you could have told me to buzz off. And then, when that other job came through, like this guy who was on the desk said, there's a job down the Gold Coast with Credit Suisse. It's a great firm. They want me to do it, but I'm not moving down to the Gold Coast. Like, he's in a cushy position in Brisbane. So I was like, why don't you do it? And I was like, what have I done? I've sat here for 2 months. I've never done anything. And he goes, you should go for it. Got it.
And so then what happened on your first day? Like, did you go in and then they had these expectations on you and you're like, oh, I got no idea what I'm doing? Or...
Oh, I definitely didn't know what I was doing. Thankfully, they knew I didn't know anything.
Okay.
So expectations were low.
Yeah.
It was a disaster. It was a disaster in many ways. Dealing with, I had to do sort of a lot of admin work, which I hated, but it taught me a lot. It panned out pretty well. Within 6 months, I got my license, my desk license, and I was the youngest stockbroker in Asia for Credit Suisse.
Wow.
So they said.
Yep.
They really, really fast-tracked me. In terms of the time, in terms of like when I could have gone into the market to become a stockbroker, you could not have asked for the best learning curve because it was May 1999. And that was right at the top, the crescendo of the tech bubble. So there were serious lessons for me ahead in what happened over the next 4 years in that job. Coming in at basically at the end point of a mania that had been going on for 5 years. And then going through the next 3, recession and a 50% correction in the market, and some really, really valuable lessons there.
Have you gotten, I always, in these capacities where you're either like because you're facilitating trades and things like that, like, have you got any notable stories of wins or losses that really, that impacted you personally? Like, and the reason why I say that is because, in some of the capacities that I've had, whether it was in sales or when I was working for Toyota, like, there was notable times where I drove for an outcome and, they're notable because, I was very proud of what I achieved. And there's also, times where obviously there's been lessons where, it's like, oh, I've made every single mistake there. I'll share one of a failure that I had. Like, so when I first became an area manager for Toyota, most of the area managers typically start out with like a rural style of a run. So my run used to be basically the Hunter, all the way up the coast to Coffs Harbour, and then through to the New England area, Tamworth, and all that sort of area. And majority of my initial dealer meetings were really, really good, bar one. And, because I guess for me, in terms of business maturity, I still took things, because I was so passionate, you take everything personally, right? And so I had this one disaster of a meeting where, basically the dealer was wanting to throw me out of his business kind of thing, right? And I remember I was having a conversation with my manager at the time, Andrew Savis, and like I burst into tears. Like I was like that, upset by the whole interaction. Yeah. Because I'd had such great interactions previously, and then this one
just hit a wall.
Prick of a guy.
Yeah.
It's probably a clash of personalities too, right? Like he's very set in his ways in terms of how he wants to do his business and things like that, and probably doesn't want to hear it. Like he's probably heard it a million times before. Yeah. People in those, like managers in those capacities, you're sort of in that role for maybe a 1.5 to maybe 3 years, and then they get somebody new. So for them, a dealer who's been a dealer for 20, 30 years, he's seen 10 of you, 15 of you.
Yeah.
So it's like, what sort of impact do you think you're going to make in my business?
Yeah.
Right? And so for the individual that's coming into it, you're like, oh yeah, this is the first time I'm doing this. So, away you go. And right. So, those things are really, like I always say, like they're impactful, and it doesn't necessarily mean that they're positive or negative, but I think, that taught me a lesson as well in terms of just being able to reframe that and think about it from their perspective as well. So
let me ask you, would you have preferred to have had that lesson earlier, or was that the right time? Like you got it several meetings in, you obviously were on a high, you were doing well, and then you got it? Or, would it have been better to have it like in the first or second straight up?
Ooh.
It's something I've thought about
Okay,
several
that's
things.
a tough one, right? Like, I think depending on your personality, if you had a meeting like that as your first meeting, a lot of people would break. They'd quit.
Yeah,
You'd
maybe.
quit, right? Like you just go, I do not want to do this job anymore.
Right.
I've just been crucified in my very first meeting. I'm not going to do it, right? So
Yeah.
I think there are certain personalities that would not go well with having that as your initial meeting. For me, look, I think the lesson's got to be learned no matter what, right? So I always think sooner is better than later because you'd rather have it happen. Yeah, you'd rather get it over and done with, and then you can try and restart the relationship and go from there, right? Or alternatively, you just got to look at it and go, this is going to be a pretty shit year and a half, 2 years or whatever while you're in this capacity, right?
Like, it depends how you frame it.
Depends how you frame it.
Yeah.
But I think and look, this sort of ties back into how I'm much like you, where when I finished uni, I did not want to study anymore. Like I just could not want to. It's not to say you didn't want to learn, but you just felt so over it.
Yeah.
Right. And you're just like, oh, I'm on the career path. I'm going to focus on my career. But you don't realize that, hey, part of your career is actually, your professional development, actually learning to improve yourself.
Yeah, that's right.
Right. So so you get to this point where you're like, you're back on this train and you're consuming all this knowledge, and it's like, hey, but if you talk to me fresh out of uni, it was like I never wanted to learn again. Yeah. But now you suddenly, you're doing all this learning, and people are like, what, you listen to how many podcasts? You read how many books?
Yeah.
But then it's like, well, yeah, like this is, you actually enjoy it, right? And I remember, this just took me back to a memory that, so in the car, my dad always used to be listening to like, audio books on tape or whatever back in when we were growing up. And as a kid, you always like, what are you listening to, Dad? Like, I don't know if it was like that in your family, but it was definitely like that in mine. And I was just like, I can't believe my dad would listen to this boring shit. Yeah, like that's
absolutely.
That's the mindset, right?
Yeah.
But now I'm that guy.
Yeah.
Like, I have my kids in the car, and then like when the phone syncs up, and if suddenly it goes to one of the podcasts that I've just been listening to, my kids would be like, can you change it to put on one of our songs? And I'm like, oh, sorry. I don't know.
Yeah, totally. I wonder if it's different though for kids. Like, I mean, kids, like if you're in your teens or in the early 20s, because I mean, you had books back then, and I guess you did have audio tapes, but it was not the whole self-learning, whatever you call podcasting and everything today. It wasn't as prolific as it is today, or at all. So you had books, but you associated books with studying, or you associated books with schoolwork. So, I mean, now if you're a kid and you've got podcasts, like once the school day ends, I wonder if you like throw on a podcast and you listen to it and you tap into whatever that stream of interest you have and explore it in your own time, because it's a totally different modality, right? It's not a book. I mean, people, I guess they're all learning on laptops, but like there's just so much more creative modalities to learn that maybe like the kids that are coming through at 23, 24 are already tapping in the next decade of understanding and learning that, we had to sort of wait for.
Well, and like I think, and if for that reason alone, like the next generation should actually be, ultra successful, more successful than what we've been, right? And you'd like to hope that they've got more perspectives and more understanding of different things, because the knowledge is all at your fingertips. I think there's a couple of worries that I have is that, we become overly reliant on not actually memorizing anything, like not actually remembering anything, because we can just go to Google and we don't have to remember it. We just type it into Google, or we ask Google or Siri or whatever.
I've thought about that as well.
Right? But I feel like, you do need to have a core level of I guess, basic concepts that are innate, in you. And that could be, and I know like it's like basic maths, right? Like our kids get taught that, right? I'm not talking about, your times tables and things like that, but I think there are probably some, core principles that, you probably do need to try and remember from school in terms of, I don't know, how gravity works or some of those things that, you don't want to be relying on just asking Google every single time, because, if you don't have your device on you, then how are you going to understand anything? But I think, the thing that I like about the podcast modality is because it's all in the form of stories, right? And if you think about how knowledge was passed down historically by previous, generations, as before we've come to this modern age of written media and things like that, it was all done through the work of storytelling, right? So I think, when they talk about like indigenous culture and when they would share, Dreamtime stories and things like that, there'll be things that would talk about, like obviously that might relate to things that you can and can't eat, right? And the whole idea behind that is so that you're passing down this knowledge, but you're passing it down in a way that, okay, there's a lesson to the story, which might be, hey, don't eat this bright colored frog.
Yeah.
But B, you're also telling it in a way that might be, it could be done through song, or it could be done through story that then people can then remember and then pass on to the next generation. Mm-hmm. So that's the reason why I like the podcast modalities, because it almost taps into that innate sort of
it's like our primordial communication.
Yeah,
just done with $2,000 worth of equipment.
Yeah, well,
and doesn't go into like a small tribe; it goes out to an entire country or
Well, but that's one of the things though, is that now you're not only getting the experience of the people that are immediately in your social circle, you can draw on experiences from people all over the world, and that is the thing that is so amazing about, I guess, why we should be able to retain more information or have more knowledge to actually, make, I think that's one of the reasons why things are transitioning so much faster, from a technology standpoint.
Yeah, I would agree.
Yeah.
I mean, this feels like a quickening.
Yeah. So we got a bit off track, but I was asking you about whether you had any, impactful moments, positive or negative, from that, first opportunity at Credit Suisse.
Oh, look, I mean, it was the most humbling experience. I've had a few, and I'm destined to have a lot more. But look, the market knows how to beat you up more times than you can possibly imagine or think of. Like it's a very cruel teacher. But it's it like for me, having really some hard lessons initially set me up in a way where I actually did fall in love with learning again in just a couple of years after I left university into that job, because I realized there was something fundamentally wrong with the way we were viewing the market. Just with that sort of that episode that happened, it was things were way out of whack, way out of alignment in terms of valuations. Basically the Fed had engineered another bubble after they had bailed out a massive New York hedge fund, which was I think there's been plenty of things leading up to that, but that could have been really the moment when the market just said, hey, doesn't matter how bad we fuck up, these guys have got our back and they're just going to blow an asset bubble and save us every single time.
Yeah.
I don't think it was everyone really quite recognized at the time, but it was the first time in the consciousness that I think for a lot of Wall Street players and a lot of people in the finance industry, they realized that they had a parachute. Anyway, so they'd basically blown this massive bubble. And then, this one sector, because it was, it was the internet age. So the TMT sectors, telecommunications, media, telecommunications, TV, media, and tech, all rallied, like they outperformed the market. NASDAQ went up. I think the NASDAQ doubled in 1 year, in that 99 year. And it was up like 5 times in like 3 or 4 years. But in that last year, it just went vertical. Like I don't think people can really remember just how crazy it was. But the moral story is like I started and I didn't know anything, right? I had an economics degree, basis in finance, really didn't know much about how markets really worked. And here I was at the number 1, number 2 stockbroking firm globally, and definitely in Australia. We had the number 1 ranked analysts in TMT, and they had all of our clients loaded up on TMT stocks. Classic ones that you've never heard of, like Melbourne IT, which was the hot stock from the, it's like pets.com in the US. These things were trading not on PE multiples because they had no earnings. They were trading on sales multiples, and the sales multiples were like 100, 200 times. It was insane. Not dissimilar to what's just really been happening in the last 2 or 3 years. Anyway, so they, there were a couple of old, salty dogs in the firm that were like, saying that things are out of control. This is, but most of the organization and especially the analysts were really on board, loading, strong buy recommendations, number one recommendations, all on these really overvalued stocks. I didn't know any better. So I thought they were smarter than me. So I just did what, they were telling us. Basically it was, following the analyst orders recommendations. And that didn't work out very well. And the crazy thing was that when the market popped, when clearly there was a shift in momentum, and rates were starting, they had to raise rates. Then you got, the analysts recommending that they continue to buy or double down on the way down. Which, I mean, you speak to Warren Buffett. Warren Buffett says if it's a great stock and it's a great story, then you continue to buy it, when it gets cut in half. Now, he's obviously talking about stocks with earnings and cash flows and all these really strong fundamental things, which I definitely believe in.
Yep.
But the premise of like buying in downtrends was something that, I thought, didn't work, or I had this gut feeling. And that's what sort of, that I pivoted, right? So I had, a really tough couple of years, and the market was in a bear market for 3 years. But I happened to sit next to, we hired a new stockbroker, and this guy was using charts a lot. And, charting is such a ridiculed sort of analytical approach.
Yep.
Technical analysis, really. Charting is not technical analysis, and technical analysis is not charting. Technical analysis is the discipline of using price action to increase probabilities in the market, primarily through statistical, quantitative measures, not, drawing lines on charts. But it did start me off on, he was a chartist more so, and looking at when, momentum breaks and when you basically use risk protocols or risk management, position sizing, all these things they never teach you in stockbroking, right? They never talk about how much risk you should take. It's just buy. If you got $100,000 portfolio, here's 5 stocks, you put $20,000 in each. It's like, hang on a minute, you're not accounting for the volatility of each of these stocks. You have to weight them differently. They had no concept of that back in the 90s. So that's why you get these wild swings in portfolios. You may have the 5 best performing stocks, but you won't perform as well as the 5 best performing stocks equal weighted because you've got market cap weighted, because you've got all these out of whack sort of equal weighted position sizes, right? 20,000 in Amazon is not going to do the same to your portfolio as 20,000 in Walmart because of the volatility. So it's just one of those things. And anyway, that really started me on a path, and I learned about it, and I totally went down that rabbit hole. I did several different technical analysis certifications, and that led me to be really involved in the Chartered Market Technicians Association, which is, I'm fast forwarding like 15 years, and now I'm on the global board, and I run the Asia development, and I'm involved in all this stuff. But since then the whole thing has become a lot more systemized and a lot more professionalized. But so it was really losing. So the answer to the question, mate, is losing money is a great teacher.
Yeah.
Losing clients' money is even more. And I took everything personally. I lost money, clients lost money, and then it was a process of building back. And so it was a really good learning curve, and it happened all within the sort of first year. So, some of these kids who came into the market in 2010 are just feeling what that means now. And they have not had that experience. They've been 9 years into the market, not quite understanding what happens when, rates go up.
Well, it's one of those things that, and this is one of the, so this goes back to what we're talking about history, right? Like I didn't study history for the HSC or anything like that. But, I've got a newer found appreciation of history because, there was a great book that I read, and it's only a short book. It's by a gentleman named Will Durant, and he was a guy that apparently had 10 volumes of historical notes that were books that he'd written about say morals and history and different topics in history, basically. And he in this book, the Lessons of History, he sort of summarized and gave examples from history of what happened in these particular situations. So how did how did religion, how has religion and history how have they been linked, and what has happened, in the ebbs and flows between, people going more pro-religious and anti-religious. And I really like that book because, it sort of highlighted to me how cyclical things are, right? So, as you're saying now, we're about to head, into probably a bear market again. And it has happened before. And, there are lessons there that, it may not, the circumstances may not be identical, but they're probably similar enough that you could say that they rhyme. So, I really like that statement that history, may not necessarily repeat, but it rhymes. And I feel like, it applies to so many different aspects of our lives that we just don't really think about. But, one of the chapters is about growth and decay. Civilizations over the course of history have grown, and then they get to this point where then suddenly civilization starts to decay, and it's just a natural process in terms of whether it's human nature or something that's innate in us. But we get to this breaking point, where things just don't, things are going so smoothly, but then suddenly, maybe one of the parts doesn't move as well anymore, and it starts to grind a little bit, and it starts to chew away at, the other parts of civilization. So
yeah, you mentioned it cycles. I haven't read this book. Like, everyone I respect has it in their top 5, so I don't know why I haven't got to it yet. But The Fourth Turning,
I haven't heard it. No.
Yeah, so these guys wrote it, I think, in the 90s, and it perfectly describes kind of what's happening today. But it's not, it was based on looking at cycles over time.
Yep.
And the fourth turning is like the
fourth turning. Okay.
Yeah, so we've basically we've had that golden period where complacency sets in, but then there's a lack of faith in institutions starting to creep in, and it builds on itself, and then you start to see some real problems, and the world order changes in this period, right? We've clearly had a world order since we ended World War II, and that is really, like, if you can't see what's happening and understand that is definitely undergoing a major change right now, then people aren't paying attention. We see it every day.
I wonder about this, right? So for the people that, and this is where I'd love to have talked to somebody that had lived through World War II, from the perspective of, like, when things like a war happen, what do the individuals, so like the civilians, the people that aren't involved in the war, I'm not talking about the soldiers. And I guess, we could probably get a pretty good idea, from looking at what's happening in Ukraine at the moment, or, if you could talk to a Ukrainian civilian about what is happening in terms of the displacement. But there's almost I get this feeling like life is almost as per normal. Right, so let's say use Australia as an example. So life has sort of gone back to semi-normal at the present moment. But then in a time of crisis, like, how quickly does the mindset shift? From that, hey, I just keep my head down, keep working, support my family, do this, do that, and life's beautiful. To suddenly, oh shit, things aren't like, this is actually going to impact me here. And I wonder if that happens for us. Obviously, as fuel prices keep rising, and if those things start to really nail the hammer home, if that's when people start to then go, oh, okay, now this is really starting to impact me. I don't know. I just feel like I don't know whether it's something that is like a slow shift, or there's an abrupt sort of turning point to it.
What's that saying? It's at first slow, then all at once.
Yeah.
Like, there's clues.
Yeah.
And if you're starting to see the clues, best to start taking action, because at one point it does just become abrupt.
Yeah.
And then you've got no time.
Yeah. So it's funny, because then, like, you might get into this mindset of prepping for something that never happens, right? Like, there's so many ways that you can look at it, right? And everybody wants to be able to say that, oh, I had the right perspective, right?
Yeah.
And that's where, hindsight is the best, what's
2020 in hindsight.
Yeah, 2020 in hindsight. Yep.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's one of those things that I've been thinking about it a lot, because, like, it's sometimes you feel like you can get caught up in this, almost like a pessimistic outlook on the world, because you focus on these little things that are happening. You go, oh, you can see these little issues that are chipping away at civilization. But then it's like, but on the other side, you can sort of just almost like do this down the middle of your face and then just go like this, and then you go, oh, the world looks perfect.
Yeah.
Right? Like it's, people can still go out, we can eat, and go to the pub, we can do all these things. We play our sport, the world's beautiful. And then, you sort of just start to look back over and you go, ooh, Ukraine and Russia not looking pretty good. Those fuel prices ain't looking pretty good. Shanghai lockdowns, ooh, that's not looking pretty good. And then you go back over and you go, but life's great.
Yeah.
Right? So it's so easy to sort of just put the blinders on. And I feel like, majority of Australians, we get very caught up in our own lives, right? Mm-hmm. And so I don't think that's necessarily it's not a slight on people. I think that's just human nature, right?
Yeah.
That we focus on what it is that we can control. Because, like you start looking back over there and you just feel like, oh, the whole world's out of control. And then you come back over here, it's like, okay, this is what I can actually control.
Well, I think that's the only way you stay sane. But, I've gone through this sort of like mental gymnastics over the years, going, oh, what can I do to sort of help things in a certain direction that I think the world should be going in? And I actually don't really think that there's much you can do other than just act local.
Yeah.
Because that is definitely something that not necessarily you can control, but you've got influence over. Hard to say that anything works. I mean, there's lots of things that you can try to be a part of, and it won't necessarily change the outcome of anything, but at least it gives you some sense of doing something. And look, I'm talking to the guy who ran for the Senate. So, well done on, I'm sure you didn't think you were going to run in politics like 5 years ago.
Absolutely not.
Something changed.
Yeah, look, I'm still processing my thoughts on it all. Obviously, the election's done and dusted, which is great. It's almost like a bit of a load off your back. That it's happened. Look, I think, I've been reflecting on it a lot, and it's like, one of the things that surprised me is just how polarizing politics is. And when I say that, it's like, if you were to meet somebody on the street and just have a normal conversation with them, and then, you establish a good enough rapport and that you can probably start talking about some pretty heavy topics, right? And people would probably be okay to engage with you, right? But then you go and throw on a yellow shirt and you want to actually, ask people, what's important to them and influencing their decision, and you get yelled at, you get abused, you get told off for no particular reason other than you're wearing a particular shirt.
Yeah,
it sounds almost crazy, and that doesn't just apply to the UAP. That applies to all the parties. There were volunteers from all political parties that probably face the same sort of vitriol. That there'd be a particular person that's, the way I liken it, it's almost tribalistic, right?
Yeah.
That people go, oh, that's my team. We go and throw on that team color and we want our team to win. And it sounds great. But the problem is that, the problem, and I guess, when we think about tribalism, well, tribalism usually involves war, right? Like, why are there tribes? Well, people banded together to survive.
Yeah.
Right. And then by banding together to survive, they wanted to make sure that they could survive and protect themselves from other people that were trying to band together to survive.
Yeah.
Right. And you go to war because at the end of the day, they might have more than you. Right. They might, want to take your women, or they might want to take your food. Right. And that's why, you go to war. And that's the problem when we have this sort of tribalism enter our worlds in terms of politics. I think it doesn't just apply to politics, though. I think you can apply that to almost any sort of ideology, religious ideology. It'd be the same, right? Like, there are these things that are just so polarizing to people that you get these really odd reactions, And I don't. When I say odd, obviously it's the extreme negative of people yelling abuse at you, and it's like people want to make judgment on who you are as a person without even having a conversation with you.
Yeah,
and then it's like, I'll give you this one example. So, I had a back and forth with a guy, and I was very polite to him. And he was like, that I was a liar about this and that and all these reasons. And I said, okay, well, here's the proof that I've got. I'm happy to be educated if you've got other sources. So, happy you provide them to me. And then he's like, oh, I don't need to do that. And I'm like, okay, well, look, if you ever, I have a podcast, you're more than welcome to come on the podcast and have a conversation with me, right? Because I think you'll find that if we actually sit down and have a conversation, we would probably agree on more things than we disagree on.
Yeah.
Right? And then his response was, oh, I would never associate with people like you. Right?
Wow. Okay.
So it's so that's an example of how I guess polarizing it is for no reason, right? Like I don't even understand what is a person like me, right? When I say that, it's like, okay, is a person like me an Asian person? Or are you saying a person like me is a person that's running for the Senate? Is a person like me a family man? What is a person like me? A father of 3? A husband? What's a person like me? There are so many things that go into making up who we are as people, right? So.
Oh, yeah. I mean, he had a clear idea in his mind, but he didn't even bother to extrapolate or explain what he meant by that. So you're left wondering. So why would you go into politics? It's just like an open question, like, because people don't want to go through that. They don't want to have, they don't want to experience all the negativity and the polarization that comes with it. Because I think, it probably is one of the, that and being like even police officer is like the 2 hardest jobs. Especially if you're running for an independent or a small party without the machine behind you to shelter you, to fund you. I mean, then it's, you see these guys and these women being sort of like parachuted in, and it's all just, it's a very comfortable sort of setup, but not, but I can only imagine, I saw some pretty crazy stuff over the last couple of weeks, but, I wasn't running for Senate.
Yeah, look, I think at the end of the day, if everybody took that opinion that, hey, why would I put myself through this, right? Then the only people that you'd have running are the sociopaths, right? Like who have the thickest skin that could not give 2 shits what anybody says about them because they want the power, they want this, they want all these sorts of things, right? And I don't think that you want a system that is full of those kinds of people. Like I think there's probably plenty of them in there already, right?
Yeah.
So...
But I think the mix is changing. I think, UAP and these independent parties, even the Teals, what they're showing is that there is enough of the unsettled electorate that's prepared to put everything on the line and run. And that, I think, is just a reflection of how far astray we are as a country, because we kind of did outsource the effort to other people who were probably more and more aligned to sociopathic tendencies, which is part of the reason why we are. But the other parties have become lazy. But this election, the first one back in Australia for 20 years, so it was one I was paying so much attention to.
Yep.
But also because of everything that's happened in the last couple of years that I felt much more invested in this one. But definitely a big change in the electorate and the way that they were engaged and involved, and the way the final vote went reflects it.
Yeah, it was. Look, I think the results were interesting. I know that people will probably make a big deal that Clive's gone and spent all this money and we didn't win a seat. I think we look to maybe get a seat in the Senate in Victoria and some others. But look, I think what we want to make sure is that we have. We represent the voices of the community, right? In the sense that, it doesn't matter what the spread is, but the fact that people had a choice in terms of being able to decide, whose voice did they want to represent them, that you've got a choice from that perspective. I think that's powerful. I think there's also a lot of apathy in the Australian people from the perspective that, we have this attitude of she'll be right, like that's the Aussie mantra.
Yeah.
Like, she'll be right, mate. Like, you don't have to worry about it. Somebody else will fix it.
Yeah.
Right. And so we've as you're right, we've outsourced it, and we've done that for many, many years. And then you start to, it's only after you get to this destination that you're like, oh, I didn't want to end up here. How do we end up here? right? And that you then got to go back and then go, oh, okay, well, this is how we ended up here, right? So I think, what happens over time is that hopefully it makes more people engaged to at least be informed about their decision. Like for me, it wasn't so much about, you have to vote me or you have to vote this or you have to vote that way. At the end of the day, you make your own informed choice, right?
And
totally. Yeah. And so like whatever the outcome is, and that's why, my one of my points that I would always say in my initial speeches was that, there's an old saying, to cut your nose off to spite your face, right? So, wishing your government to fail is actually wishing your country to fail. Why would I want the country to fail? If you love this country, you don't want the country to fail.
No.
You want the country to actually go in the right direction.
Yeah.
Right? What is that right direction? And this is why I think it always goes back to, and why I would say that, even people across all the different parties on the political spectrum, we all actually want the same thing. We want Australia to be a great place to live. We want it to be a great country. We want to have great opportunity. We would have, the freedom to do, live our lives in a peaceful manner. We want to be safe, right? These are the things that I think everybody would agree universally that, hey, this is what we want Australia to be, right? Now the question is, okay, and this is where I think a lot of the education needs to be around in future is that the election should be a contest of ideas. We all agree that we want Australia to be a great place, right? So let's talk about what is our pathway to get to that great place, right? And each party should be there going and presenting, well, what is our pathway to get there? What are we suggesting that goes there? What are we suggesting that takes the country to that place, right? And it's a battle of ideas to then make sure that Australia goes in that right direction, right?
Yep.
That's what I think. But, obviously a lot of people just don't think like that. They think on that, still thinking from whether it's that tribalistic perspective or they think about, we just want to change the government. There's a lot of people that said, we just want to get rid of ScoMo, right?
Yeah.
That's a very broad statement, right? Like there's many different ways you could get rid of ScoMo. Like, what do you want to
be careful what you wish for, unless you're informed and the person or the party that you're voting for as the alternative proposes a lot better ideas, you might end up in a much worse place.
Yeah.
Not saying that's going to happen, but like just this, get rid of that guy so the next guy can come in is like, that's that sort of outsourced thinking that I really hope the Australian electorate and all Western electorates start to wake up and realize that they've got to like pay attention to policies.
Yeah. Well, this is the other thing, right, that I think is interesting is that there's almost like I feel like there's a bit of like a famine mentality when it comes to certain lines of thinking. And I'll give you the example. So I remember having a conversation with a young couple and, I asked them what they thought, in terms of like interest rates going up. And they said, oh, it's a good thing, right? We might be able to buy a house. Right, that was their mentality. So it was like, that if the property prices crash, that's great for us because now we might be able to purchase a house, right? So it's very simplistic sort of mindset. Unfortunately, economically, it doesn't necessarily mean that's the case because interest rates obviously go up. The cost of that money is now more expensive. So if you couldn't afford $1 million property, let's say $1 million loan or $800,000 loan at 2 and 3%, well, a $500,000 loan at maybe 5 or 6% is probably not going to be as serviceable either, right?
No, that is they're not really thinking that one through.
So, but this is what I mean is that they have this a very simple sort of mindset, and I don't mean that in a derogatory sense, right? Like let me rephrase.
Well,
that.
in their case, they may have so much cash that they can withstand, and they may be both may be in a job, or one person might be in a job where there's no chance of being made redundant. But typically, in an environment where rates are rising, layoffs are next.
Yeah.
And you may have the money today, but you may not be willing to spend it tomorrow if you lose your job.
That's it.
So, yeah.
Yeah, and also the lending tightens, right? So
and you might not be able to get the loan anyway because the prudential rules change. The banks tighten up their lending practices, which are all starting to do.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. All right. Well, let's wind back a little bit because I want to ask you about going overseas.
Okay.
Yeah. So sorry, because I'm just curious because you said you wanted to go and travel. So I want to hear about so what was your plan? So you've been at Credit Suisse for 4 years.
Yeah.
And then you decided I had enough, or was there something else?
I just never gave up on that dream. Like, and back then, Australia had the working visa program with the UK, so it was just like that rite of passage. Like Australians, for decades go over to the UK. They do 2 years where they sort of work half the time, and they travel around and see Europe. So that was always like in the back of my mind. And I thought if I didn't do it now, I'd never do it. So I built up enough experience, I thought, at that point, and I come through that really tough period and built up a pretty good book of business with clients and started to do much, much better. So I gave up my clients to the other brokers and said, I'll be back in 2 years. Don't blow them up, please.
Yeah.
And I went off to the UK, and then I just sort of, I could only work part-time in the UK, but the UK's got this loophole where you can basically go over there and work in contract roles.
Yep.
And you can set up a company, and it's an offshore company. Everyone does this through Isle of Man, or what's the other one that they've got? But so lots of Australians, South Africans, Canadians, New Zealanders go, and they get contract jobs wherever. And like a lot of them end up in banks. That's where I ended up.
Yep.
So you get paid pretty well, even though it was a pretty much a recession in 2003 when I went. The banks were just, I mean, this was really, they were printing money. They literally do print money, and they were certainly making a lot of money. And ended up working in some back office job, Morgan Stanley, to fund my European adventures in 3 or 4 months' time.
Yep.
So yeah, I did that, and I was able to chop and change and move from bank to bank. The market was so hot that you could basically move and get a pay rise with the next bank. It was really crazy times. Totally changed. So I did that, and I did a lot of traveling as well. Nowhere near as much as I thought I would, even though I stayed longer. But after about a year, I was like, I really love London. I really love the anonymity and just how big it was for that weird reason. Like a lot of people find they go to New York or London and other big cities that they get lost and they don't enjoy it. I felt the opposite. Like I just loved walking out of the apartment or house wherever I was staying and just going, right, what to do today? Because you could literally, there's so much to do. So I, after about a year and making some good friends, and decided that I would pursue a highly skilled migrant visa, which was another visa that they have now knocked on the head, or they've changed, whereby if you were under the age of 28 and you had certain tertiary education and you had certain work experience and you earned a certain amount of money, you could basically stay longer. You could stay indefinitely and even apply for citizenship or PR. Yep. Not that I was thinking I'd do that, but I just wanted to stay longer.
Yep.
So I wasn't happy of going back after 2 years. Like I was not done.
Yeah.
So I also did that because after about a year and a half of working in banks, hedge funds, which were all great experiences. Like I wanted to get back into the front office. I wanted to become a trader, stockbroking, move into the institutional market. Yep. Because I was in like private retail stockbroking. So that visa allowed me to get that, and I think that was around 2004, 2005. So after I got it, I said, right, I'm going to do another trip through Europe, a couple of months. My brother came over. We did Croatia and Spain and France and Germany and a few other places. And then I focused on trying to get a job. And I got a job in a small institutional brokerage firm. So this time our clients were hedge funds and long-only asset managers. And the wrinkle was that it was covering Asian markets from London.
Okay.
So I was doing the 11 nights or like 10 in the morning shifts.
Wow.
Just me and one other guy trading Asian equities.
Yep.
And, it was fun. And then they sort of take me on the show and they said, well, we're going to open up a office in Singapore. So I'd been in UK for like 4 years and had a blast. But a lot of my friends were starting to move, and my Australian friends were starting to move back.
Okay.
So I thought, makes sense. Asia's on the way home.
Yep.
And that took a little bit longer than I thought it would, but by 2007, myself and my colleague had basically been sent to Singapore, and we opened the Singapore office.
Oh wow!
And I was still pretty young for what I was doing, and it was all great. But that was October 2007. So I basically had 3 years out of the market, right? So I witnessed in Australia in the stockbroking firm, half a year of a bull market, the next 3 years of a bear market. Then I went overseas and traveled as the bull market resumed.
Yep.
So I missed all that, came back into the market in 2006.
Yep.
And we had 1 year of a bull market.
Yeah.
And then we had the calamity of all calamities. So that was kind of interesting. And, you know, I don't know if you want to stop there or like talk you through the Singapore stuff.
Yeah.
So anyway, and then 14 years later, I eventually came back to Australia after saying Singapore would just be 2 years.
So you spent 14 years in Singapore?
Yeah.
Wow.
14 and change.
Yeah, wow. Okay. Yeah, what did you like about Singapore? So my father's from Singapore originally. Okay. So, you know, like my relatives live in Serangoon, one of the suburbs there.
Yeah.
Singapore's a beautiful place, but what were your thoughts on Singapore?
At that time, I mean, it was it's before GFC. So, you know, being in finance was exciting. And opening an office and sort of being at the frontier, trying to build up a business from scratch, being thrown in the deep end in so many different ways. I was just happy to be there and be part of it.
Did you have to set up the office yourself, like, you know, you and your colleague?
Yeah, in so much as, you know, we basically were the first ones there, and then we were in charge of sort of hiring other people. A lot of the admin stuff was being run out of London until we got a secretary set up, but we were doing some of that as well. And then more and more people got shipped over from London office. So I was never like the head of the office or anything, but we were, you know, from there, the ground up, basically doing a lot of the hard yards in the initial days. You know, it was probably a good thing that I never was the CEO of the branch because, as it turns out, our headquarters in London had basically. So when you get the Singapore license for a financial firm, you have to lodge money in a bank account with the Singapore bank account as sort of like collateral for any damages or anything that could go wrong. You know, so Singapore's very smart in the way that they set things up. As it turns out, the HQ had basically laundered or taken the money out of the account, and they shut down the office in 2009.
Okay.
Yeah, so we were just like in there one day, and you know, we got a tap on the shoulder. We'd just gone through the biggest bear market, and the whole financial market had nearly crumbled. Probably should have crumbled in hindsight. That's my libertarian streak coming through. Not probably, should have. But then we just got a tap on the shoulder saying, hey, you know, this is your last day. Pack up your stuff. We're closing down the office. And months later we find out why.
Okay.
So that was that. So that was kind of interesting. But that whole GFC period was amazing. Like amazing in a good and bad way. Like just being there and seeing it and
and the impacts of it.
Understand and having this like very innate feeling that something was wrong, like well before that, and then seeing the cracks, and then actually we were. I made a lot of money in 2008, because I was early in calling what was going to happen, and I didn't necessarily understand fundamentally all the problems with the mortgages and the US real estate market and the derivatives that have been laid on, but from a charting perspective, looking at the way markets were acting in the first quarter of 2008, I started writing some very, very bearish notes to clients, and we managed to short quite a few stocks, which made clients a lot of money. And so it was a really good year, but in the same way, it's like one of those bittersweet sort of things, because the whole world, literally felt like everything was crumbling. Like there wouldn't be economies after it, which shows you how distorted the banking sector had become in the way that it influences economies. I mean, it had grown. I'm not going to get these numbers right, but it's something like in the 70s, the banking sector represented about 7% of GDP. Like they weren't the numero uno, but by then they were like 25, 30% of GDP in the US and various other countries. Now what do? It's financial engineering. It's clipping, it's getting in the middle of a financial transaction between a customer and a business, or business and a business, or a customer and a customer, and just taking a levy.
Yep.
And then just because they're so close to the money printers, they are the money printers. Like one thing that people...
Well, it's fractional banking, right? Like that's how they...
Fractional banking, yep.
Yeah. So they can take a deposit and then they can go and loan it out how many times on top. Yeah.
And the central banks are monetizing debt. Like they are printing money, but the banks are the primary source of credit creation. So they, if you think of the financial system, if you think of money like being a tap, they're the closest to the faucet. So they get the money first. So when credit is easy and you can go and get loans, that money goes through them first. They invest in the stock market. They look for high return opportunities. They all make the first cut of the new money that goes into existence, and then they pay that out as bonuses and high salaries and whatnot. And then Johnny going out to get a business loan for your car dealership or some other enterprise that you're involved with, they'll give you the loan, but like you're not the first to it. So they've already distorted the economy first. And that's not necessarily chasing economically viable projects, because there's so much distortion in the market. They can sort of front run opportunities and then withdraw liquidity later, make money as while other people are still left holding the bag, or they're so close to the government policies that the incentives that government do, to create whatever program they're running, they also know how to manipulate that and tack onto those opportunities. Classic example is when, rates are low, a lot of projects look economically viable. But as soon as rates go up, the return on that investment is either zero or negative. And they're just they're anticipatory agents. They know a lot more, and then they exploit everything that the common person doesn't. It's just typically the swings of the economy that are felt in the in the working class.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Okay, so when you would 2009, when you got tapped on the shoulder and said, "Hey, we're closing this office," what was your mindset?
I just went into hyper job seeking mode. I didn't want to leave, so I just started really looking for jobs, and there were actually quite a few jobs going at the time, and I managed to find something relatively quickly. I was trying to, I was thinking about moving to Hong Kong. My girlfriend was in Hong Kong at the time, so I was thinking about moving up there. But I stayed in Singapore and joined another new brokerage outfit in 2009. And by then sort of things had started to change. So there was like new rules coming in, and and because of what happened to GFC, like one of the good things was that the banks stopped a lot of the internal trading.
Yep.
So I thought at that time, it metastasized into something else, which I discovered only 1 or 2 years later in another job. But at that time, I was servicing a lot of the prop desks at Merrill Lynch and Nomura, like the internal bank guys that were trading bank capital. And they were like, by 2009, 2010, starting to say, close up the desk. We're going to close up the desk because we're not allowed to do this anymore. Like the internal proprietary trading desks were kind of like on the nose. So after what had happened with GFC.
Yep.
So a lot of my clients were sort of fading off, and I thought, okay, this is like my next move. I really wanted to go to the buy side and work at an asset manager or a hedge fund. And I was very fortunate that I was given the opportunity to do that. But it was there that I met a lot of the guys who were previously in the prop desks, and they'd moved them to different teams, called them different things, gave them slightly different functions, but at the end of the day, they were trading the bank's capital. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Oh, there's always, I think that ingenuity will always apply to any sort of rule set. That's what people, you can try and this is the problem, right? Like, what is the pathway that you go down, that you make things so prescriptive that, you've got to, all that happens is when the more prescriptive you make things, the more elaborate the loopholes become, right? Like, I don't think you're ever really going to stamp out that behavior. If there's an opportunity for money to be made, people will find the opportunity to make that money, right? And I always like to say, so I think it goes something along the lines of, so your propensity to handle or address problems is directly related to your propensity to earn, right? So, people go,
that's interesting. I like that.
Right? So the bigger the problems you can handle, or the bigger the problems that you can address, the more return that you should be able to get as a result of it. So, and we can say, like, people talk about trusts and things like that, and they go, all these trust fund people, blah, 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 right? But they don't really have an understanding that, there's legitimate reasons why people might want to use a trust for tax purposes or whatever else. And yes, it's an added level of brain damage and headache, right? To have all these
admin.
And admin. But if you can't handle the brain damage and the admin, well, you don't get the benefits that come as a result of having those facilities either, right? So likewise, when it comes to corporate taxes and things like that, well, that's why I'm sure a lot of these big companies have really large corporate tax teams that look at how do they extract every single dollar that they can, or withhold every single dollar that they can avoid paying, right? So because the bigger the problems you can, the bigger the problems you can handle, the more you deserve to keep. So.
Yeah. It's like the rules, like the rules of governments and regulators. They don't recognize incentives and human behavior in the way that they should, and a lot of the time it's all just band-aids treating the symptoms. Right? Yeah. Not nothing, but I mean, asking a bank to stop its prop trading, is number one, not recognizing that they're a profit-taking institution. They'll find new ways.
Yep.
It also doesn't treat, why do they have so much excess capital and to gamble? Because the whole market is, they're essentially money creation engines, right? So their ability to fractional reserve or to create money and borrow at the Fed fund rate, which is lower than what you and I can. Like, we can't go to the Fed at 50 basis points. We have to pay, 3%.
Yep.
They get privileges, right? Yep. It's just distorted, and of course they'll never address that. Yep. That's really the issue if we want to fix it.
Yeah. So I find that interesting, right? So I guess I want to move to crypto, and I want to understand when your sort of crypto journey started and when you started to get involved in that side of things, because I think I find the crypto market interesting because it's almost like how would I say this? Like a new generational style of. So I guess when you think about banking, there's standout names that obviously are attached to the banking systems and the banking names, like really large institutions that have been there for eons that can control the market, right? And when I say that, it's just because when you have the market cap behind you, well, you can influence what the market does. And actually, there's a book that I read called Reminiscences of a Stockbroker. I don't know if you read that book.
Of a stock trader, yeah. Oh my gosh. Yeah, it's basically the number one book that gets recommended to anyone in finance. Fantastic book.
Yeah. And so but it's not even it's not a true story. It's
based on true.
It's based on true stories.
Yeah.
So and I guess, for people listening, to sort of give you a basic synopsis, it's about a guy who, is basically learning to becoming a stock trader and things like that. And he makes it and goes bust about 4 times, I think, before he ends up committing suicide. But I think the lessons in that book are really profound. And obviously one of the main lessons that I took away from it was that you can never beat the market. You have to go with the direction that it's going, right? Like, and you'll see, when if anyone's interested and you actually go and read the book, like the plays that he makes, the more capital he has behind him, the bigger the plays he can make. And those plays then influence, the market sentiment. And by influencing the market sentiment, then, he can capitalize more. And I think there was one example where, like, he saw some opportunity to buy, I think it was cotton or something like that. And he's bought all the cotton. And then people have gone, oh, there's a shortage of cotton commodities. So we'll go and everybody thought, oh, cotton's hot stock, so we'll buy cotton. And then as the cotton prices kept driving up and up and up, then he started to just drip feed it back to the market.
Yeah.
And made a killing on the day.
That's one of the oldest plays in the book, that one. It's been done many times since too.
So this is the thing, right? Like, I think it's just one of those things that, a lot of people don't appreciate. I don't think most retail traders who try and get into investing for the first time, I think that that book, whether you want to invest in crypto or whether you want to invest in shares, is probably a must read, right?
Absolutely. Definitely top three for me. So what you just mentioned is basically trend following as a style of trading, which is something that I've basically aligned myself with. Like one of the things, just a quick side note before we go into crypto, is like everyone has a style. Like Buffett has a style. It's worked very, very well for him. Everyone needs to find a system in the markets that suits them, suits their psychology. Some people it's day trading, spread trading, 'cause it suits their psychology. They're more sort of like, they need to be really engaged with it. Other people just don't want to look at the market, but want to be disciplined in what they do. So there's a style for that kind of person as well. Dollar cost averaging, rules based, just typically some sort of technical analysis approach. Yeah, and the other thing that mentioned about him was that, these are the days of information asymmetry. So there was lots of edges in the market to exploit because information wasn't shared widely. That's been improved. That's one of the good things that's happened. But, it's not solved. Like people get information first. That still happens. But yeah, sorry, there was the question around what got me excited or interested in crypto.
Yeah. So when did that sort of come into your life?
I remember I've been asked this question before. So the first time I ever saw it was on Zero Hedge. Zero Hedge is this fantastic. Well, I think it's great. Zero Hedge has been around since the GFC, and I tell you what, that is it was the only place that was posting real stories, and they're snarky and they're a little bit cynical, quite a bit. So they post other people's news. And they post a lot of the research coming out of the banks. So for financial markets, it's excellent. But what they do is they contextualize it and they overlay their own commentary onto what's being said, or they link things that people aren't seeing. And yes, it's pessimistic. Yes, it's like anti-establishment, but it is a great source of information. And they've broken tons of stuff. Like they were the ones that got kicked off Twitter in February of 2020 for posting the story about the Indian university researchers, the PhDs, that had sequenced COVID and said, hey, there's some segments of various other viruses, including HIV in this thing. This is weird. And they got kicked off Twitter for posting that. And then those researchers pulled their research paper down from the research archive and database and were never heard of again. Okay. And I think I don't want to speculate, but may have got some big funding from some very big companies. In any case, it's a great source. So I remember seeing a headline of Bitcoin in it, and I remember looking at it going, I don't know what the hell that is, but the name didn't make sense. And I never read, and it was one of those like ignorant moments where I didn't read it again, but I thought, what is that Bitcoin? I'll come back to that. That was 2011. Probably trading at a couple of dollars. The next time I heard about it was when Cyprus got into trouble in 2013. So they got... had a banking crisis in 2013, and stories in Zero Hedge started popping up again that Bitcoin was exploding higher, and they were linking people in Cyprus who had their bank accounts were getting money out, and they were using Bitcoin. And at the time, the European debt crisis was still pretty much fresh in everyone's memory. It was a year earlier, because what happened in Cyprus was total wake-up call for me. And I think you may have talked about this. I know the UAP kind of definitely we're aware of it. But the bail-ins happened. So I think something insane. I don't think it was 90% of people's bank accounts, but it was a huge amount.
Yeah. So I guess to explain bail-in to people, essentially it was like, so your deposits that are in the bank, I don't know in Cyprus, but like if there's a specific amount that they could be used to then address.
Recapitalize the banks that had basically got into, because the banks had taken on way too much debt. They were funding themselves through European markets. The European markets were melting, debt markets, and the central banks had to step in. So the Cyprus banks were locked out because they weren't inside the euro. I hope I'm getting this correct. They weren't inside the European Union, so they didn't have the same privileges as an Italian bank, which was essentially the same, bankrupt. So they did when they couldn't get funding, and no one was prepared to be the lender of last resort to them, which is how banks get bailed out, which is how the US banks got bailed out in 2008. The Fed came along and said, hey, we're going to help you.
Yeah.
They said, right, well, the only thing that we've got going for us are deposits, so we're going to take them.
Yep.
And we're going to pay back our debtors, because in the structure of, financial markets, the bondholders, the debt holders, they get paid back first. Equity and depositors in a bank are left always holding the bag. And when that happened, I was like, oh, wow. I never thought I'd see that in my lifetime. That's interesting. I thought that only happened in the 1900s or 1930s, and we sort of fixed that. But then, and so Bitcoin shot up, and I was like, what is this Bitcoin? And then I spent 2 or 3 years half-assed trying to understand it.
Yeah.
And because I'm not a very tech-savvy person, I was like, I don't understand this, but I know that based on what I've seen from a libertarian or a financial markets perspective, this has got something. There's something there. So it crashed in 2014, and it was in this bear market in 15. And so I'm a technical analyst, and I looked at the market, and I know when a market is, or an asset is starting to bottom out and is breaking basically back up out of a basing pattern. And that started to happen in 16. I was like, okay, I really got to start doing some work on this thing. Things looks like it's going to go for a massive run, and it was supposed to be dead. Like everyone had written it off for the second time in its history, because it had gone through 2 bull runs and it collapsed 90%. And when things collapse 90%, they never come back.
Yeah.
Right? Rarely. Bitcoin did twice, and I was like, oh, this is bizarre.
Yeah.
This might have some legs. So then I fortuitously met someone who's become a really close friend, who's now started a hedge fund. I've been a little bit involved with, sort of helping him out over the last couple of years. He's now completely independent and whatnot. And we exchanged notes. He wanted to learn about technical analysis because he was trading and investing and wanted to know that aspect. And I wanted to know about Bitcoin. And he helped me understand it a lot. He was actually, he's a great guy. He started, basically got like a license or a Ripple, which is still a fairly large cryptocurrency. He started Ripple Singapore, which was the first exchange trading cryptocurrencies in Singapore. But it wasn't just cryptocurrency to cryptocurrency. It was cryptocurrency to fiat in several different fiat currencies, and cryptocurrency to gold.
Oh, wow.
So it was hard assets, fiat, and crypto back in 2015, which was like, pretty extraordinary. And then the banks came along and shut them down. And that's when he switched to becoming a fund manager.
Yep.
That year in 16 and then in 17, I was really, I was still so technologically naive about the whole thing, but I understood that this is, it's a medium for exiting the financial system, potentially storing your wealth, a medium of exchange, but it was extremely risky at that point that I still thought it's binary. It's either going to zero or it's going so much higher. I hadn't invested a lot in 2017, and then the bear market happened in 2018. And, technical analysis 101, you do not invest in a bear market. You wait for it to break up to know that it's, there's momentum in market. Momentum's a real thing. It's been studied in academia. It is real. Markets swing up and down. So try to catch the trend like the guy from...
Like riding a wave. Yeah.
Riding a wave. And in 18 and 19, I really did my homework. And throughout those 2 years where the market crashed another 85%, the third time in Bitcoin's history, it's down more than 80 to 85%.
And you're like, okay, this is the chance.
It was like, okay, let's just keep an eye on this and see what's happening. And things were getting built. Bridges to institutions were being done. The biggest challenge for Bitcoin was that there was no custody solutions. Banks don't hold physical assets on their books. They use custodians. And no one had solved the custodian challenge of Bitcoin, even though it's a non-physical thing. An asset manager, a hedge fund's not going to, typically, it's changing, but the theory was that I'm not going to own the Bitcoin and have the private keys amongst the guys. I'm like, what happens if we're on a plane and 3 of us go down and we can't access the Bitcoin, right? We'd rather outsource that to a custodian Because when we buy shares, our custodian holds the shares. Like we trade them and we settle with them at the end of the day. That's the way the whole financial system works. So these big custodians have grown up in an industry, and the asset managers and the trading firms and the hedge funds have also grown up not they own the asset, but they don't hold the asset. They pay someone to do it.
Yep.
And then that started getting solved. And I was like, oh, hang on. Like, now I see a pathway for major institutions to come in. And then the money printing happened again. And the arguments for, a type of money that has a monetary policy that is the antithesis of the currencies, of our own national fiat currencies, that no one controls, that is decentralized, and, rain, hail, or shine will continue to go on. Something that you can take with you anywhere by just owning the private key, which is a series of words that you can hold in your head or on a piece of paper or somewhere, and take that with you, unlike you can do with a bar of gold. That was all sort of starting to make a lot of sense. One of the things that I don't think people understand in our country or in Western countries, even though the percentage of people who now own Bitcoin or have traded it is in the high single digits in most surveys that we see, they never have the perspective of the person in Argentina. They never have the perspective of the person in Africa or in Asia or in Europe. Look what's happened in Ukraine. If you call Ukraine a European country, overnight they had no access to financial accounts. Well, if they did, the value of their currency cratered 90%.
Yep.
So that's it. Your wealth is destroyed.
Yep.
And you had to leave your home and maybe get across to Hungary or Poland.
Yep.
If you had Bitcoin, you were able to move your wealth across the border. They could have searched you. You got to go robbed by bandits looking for gold, looking for cash, looking for treasure, any sort of valuables that you have. But they couldn't get your private code, private key. So yeah, that's one of the things that I always struggle with because I'm doing the job that I do. Like I always get questions. It's got no value. It's like step back, put yourself in the shoes of the 90. Put yourself in the shoes of 80% of the rest of the world, and tell me whether something like this doesn't make sense.
Yep. Okay. So I guess, people bring up that it doesn't have value because it's not tangible like a bar of gold is, right?
Yeah.
But it's a lot more, what's the right word? If you had to go and cross a border with a bar of gold, chances are you probably won't be holding onto that bar of gold for very long.
Yeah. There's only so many places you can put it too.
Yeah, that's true. So there is I guess some benefits of that as well. But I guess the things that I sometimes think about is that if there for whatever reason like a solar flare or something, some kind of EMF just wiped out half the network or something like that, or basically meant that you couldn't get online and things like that, well then you wouldn't be able to access your thing either. But same thing, whether it's gold or whether it's whatever else, there's all those sorts of considerations that unless you've physically got the gold on you, there's no point owning gold, but it's stored in a mint or a safe somewhere that you can't access it, right? So
and if that happens, you've got bigger problems like food, and water.
Yeah. I think people are thinking that I'll be able to use this to get food and water, but if it came down to being starving and not, you can keep your bloody bar of gold. Like it's not going to mean anything if you can't even survive to the person that's got the food. Yeah. They'll just keep eating and stay alive, and then when you die, they'll just come take it off you.
Yeah. I mean, I still think gold has a role to play in financial markets. Like it's not the decrepit thing and outdated thing that I think people. I mean, look at what China and Russia are doing. Yep. Essentially gold backing their currencies right now.
That's right.
But yeah, you've got bigger problems if the grid goes down, and everything takes out because you might not have Bitcoin and you might be thinking you're in a pretty good position.
Yeah,
you've got electronic money.
Yeah,
so you don't have physical cash. No one has physical cash.
Yeah.
So yeah, you wouldn't have access to your dollars either.
Yeah. Well, I think nowadays is, in society, we're probably more in debt than in terms of, having savings. We have negative, when I say negative, it's like, we have offset accounts, right? So we have money, but it's not really, it's like we have debt.
Yes.
So we have debt that we can draw from.
Yeah. Yeah. How crazy is that?
Yeah. Right. But that's the way that, for the last, 10, 15 years, you'd have been crazy to not have structured yourself that way. Right.
Yeah. Show me the incentive, I'll show you the outcome. I mean, they said to us, we're going to completely inflate away the value of your money.
Yeah.
If you didn't put it into assets, you would have got crushed. Now everyone's going to get crushed as the deflation starts to hit. And it's unnecessary because it's just a product of the monetary system that we have. And people don't necessarily understand that there are alternatives, but you try and tell someone that, we should move away from central banking, or at least have a competing currency structure.
Yep.
So, hey, central banks go to town.
Yeah.
But let's also allow other monies to exist.
Yep.
And let people choose which monies they
want to use. Yeah.
Which is kind of what we have now with Bitcoin, because Bitcoin is an outlawed.
Yep.
There's always a risk that they will, but it's very hard to ban. They'll probably regulate it. They will regulate it, and I think that's okay to some degree, as long as there's no major missteps. And in Australia, it seems to be moving in that right direction, and even in the US, it's starting to look that way as well. Yep. But yeah, it's just we just have this boom bust cycle. Debt is money, but actually, in days gone by, savings used to be what we invested.
Yep.
Right. Now
we're investing in debt. We're investing debt, I should say. Yep.
Yeah, taking debt for assets.
Yep. Okay. So then, how did that lead you into your current role? So,
2017, I was working at Bloomberg in Singapore.
Yep.
And I was in a different role to I am now. I was basically an equity specialist because that was my 20 years of experience. Yep. So I was dealing with equity asset managers and equity hedge funds for Bloomberg, basically helping them. Bloomberg's just financial software. Everyone thinks of it as the Bloomberg TV, but that's the small part of the bit. It's the marketing arm of Bloomberg. Bloomberg is the largest financial software company in financial markets.
I wasn't aware of that.
We have the largest penetration. If you go to any asset management firm, they're going to have Bloomberg software or a Bloomberg terminal, they call it. So we're it's a very dominant software, and it's a really incredible company that's done extremely well and continues to innovate. But but 2017 we hadn't done anything in cryptocurrencies, and I was just doing my day-to-day job, but I started to really make some vocal noises about why don't we have, we had Bitcoin on the terminal, on the software, so we're tracking the price, and we tracked a few other cryptocurrencies, but we didn't have many of the other ones. And so by the time of 2020 came around, the market had grown from 500 billion to basically 1.5, but I was saying to them in 2019, I was like, this is coming. This is going to be a huge wave. Let's build some product. People are going to start asking. Our clients are going to start trading this. They are already. They're going to want, trading system solutions. They're going to want software solutions, pricing solutions, all these cool things that we do with equities and commodities and fixed income. They're going to ask for it in crypto. And I was just basically a thorn in the company side there for 2 years, banging the table. And then we started to develop in-house. And there was a couple of roles that came up, and they asked me to move to the research team, Bloomberg Intelligence, which is just a massive team now. It used to be small. It's now in terms of the number of research analysts and strategists, it amounts to more than 300. So if you had to rank us versus all the sell-side banks or the big commercial banks in terms of the number of research analysts, would maybe rank in the top 5 or top 6.
Wow.
And they had done a little bit of crypto coverage, but I came on to be the dedicated crypto market analyst, and I think we'll probably grow the team out in the next year or so, and we'll have more and more. So I just parlayed everything that I knew about equity markets and technical analysis, and also studying crypto in my own time, which I did a lot, and then just turned it into this research role.
Yeah, wow. So you sort of created the role for yourself. You banged the table for a couple of years, and then they're going, hey, we're going to do this. And it's like, okay, that's me.
Yeah, I don't know what they were thinking, but they probably thought this was the best way to shut me up.
Well, it's good that you managed to also get the flexibility to be able to do it as well, right? Like,
Yeah, very appreciative that they did that, yeah.
Yeah. So then, in this capacity, right, like, do you find, there's obvious, so when, like, and what I'm curious about is, when they've got this room of, and it's not really a room per se, but when you've got a team of 300 or so financial analysts all working away on different things, like how do they direct that? Do they go and say, so each person is responsible for their own individual markets, or is it that there might be things that you work on collectively and there might be things that you work on separately? Like how does that get structured?
Well, they're typically bringing in people from sell-side banks and from buy-side asset managers who are analysts there to be analysts for us. So they already know their market. They could be the telecommunications analyst.
Okay.
Buy-sides, and they're bringing them in because we need one of them. We're building out the team. So you come in with this area of expertise. Maybe sometimes you come in with a different area of expertise that they want to feel something different, and they say, right, well, you can basically apply yourself and do that.
Yeah.
That definitely happens. In equities, it's, if you're the banks analyst, you can easily become the real estate analyst. There's a lot of similarities there.
Yeah.
And then with me, it was like, to be honest, they were like, you do what you think's best.
Really?
Like I had guardrails,
but
it was essentially a pretty open ticket or a blank canvas, which was fantastic. But yeah, to answer the other part of your question, we do collaborate. Like I wrote a piece on Bitcoin's layer 2 solution, which, without going into technicalities, there's solutions being built on top of Bitcoin to make it a true peer-to-peer cash payment settlement system in a fast and low-cost manner, similar but definitely not the same as a Visa or a MasterCard. So I wrote on that, and then the Australian banks analyst is looking at what the Aussie banks are doing around how they thinking about crypto and integrating blockchain technology, and we sort of collaborated on a piece. I mean, really it was him who sort of drove it, but he asked just for a little bit of advice around some of the things that Bitcoin was doing, so we collaborated on pieces. And this is the cool thing about crypto. It's gonna touch every single industry. So there's potential for me to help out the gaming analyst who's looking at, because they're all moving into the metaverse.
Yeah.
There's, Web3, which is really, part of the software technology sector. So there's so much. And then there's I actually just today reached out to one of the commodity analysts who's talking about how currencies will be potentially commodity backed in the future, how things are changing. And, we potentially could do something on like the changing monetary order, which would be like, in the future, you're going to have you're going to have currencies that are going to be backed by commodities. They already are for the first time now this year, really, Russia.
Okay. Oh, yeah.
The way it's buying gold.
Yep.
And what China's...
Have they pegged the ruble to a particular dollar point or ruble point of gold? No, they haven't. But they're just building up their assets, right?
Yeah, so I don't fully understand it yet, but the Russian government is buying gold from its citizens. And I think it's also taking foreign purchases of any of its gas or exports in gold.
Yep.
So that's now on the government's balance sheet.
Okay.
Which means that their currency is a lot stronger than it was when it was backed by nothing. It was backed by the central bank printing. So if you look at a chart on what happened, Ukraine invasion, the ruble collapsed, absolute collapse, as you would expect it would, because then came the sanctions, and then came the US's basically decision to kick them out of the financial monetary order, which is unprecedented. And we can talk about that if you want. But within like a month or two, it had regained it's actually a stronger currency now than it was before Ukraine, because of the decisions that they've made.
Yeah.
So, there's the law of unintended consequences. And, the way that they've changed it. And like, if you're a commodity producing country and you've got obviously this inflationary period that we're going through, that is one way that you can shore up your currency, is to start to back it with commodities. Or commodity producers will have stronger currencies potentially, depending on their financial situation, because they have the commodity.
But do you think it should be tied to all commodities, or do you think it should just be tied purely to gold?
Well, I mean, gold's the best monetary asset because it has properties that other commodidies don't. It has inelastic supply, and it's non-perishable. But just say that you are. I mean, you're not necessarily backing your currency with, say, copper, but in a world where you may be cut out of the financial system and you're trading with several partners who are basically just going to buy all your copper all day long, like China. Then you're essentially becoming somewhat insulated through the fact that you have a huge amount of that one commodity.
That's correct. Yeah. Okay. All right. I want to switch it up a little bit, and I'm curious about company cultures, right? So you've worked in a few of these different places. Are there any standouts in terms of which places had the best culture and why?
That's a really good question. I've been with Bloomberg for 8 years now, so Bloomberg's culture is extremely open and very, diversity and inclusivity driven, which is fantastic. So I think it has a sort of a very low tolerance for any of the improper sort of workplace behaviors. But I think most companies have by now. Like, I don't know if that really goes on anymore. The old days and the bank trading floors are like, they're far gone. And that's for the better. But I don't know what kind of makes one better than the other. I think it's a good question. I've been somewhat insulated by the fact that I've been inside one company for 8 years. But in terms of like in terms of places to work, it has a very high regard.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. All right. All right. Well, we've already done an hour and 47 here, so unless you've got anything else you want to ask me about, we can talk about anything. I don't mind. But
no, I mean, that was I guess that was longer, and it goes faster than I would have thought.
Yeah. So look, usually, most of my episodes end up being roughly a couple of hours. It just depends, give or take. Depending on what's going on, I try and be mindful of people's time as well. But yeah, it's free flowing. We just generally go through things, and that's how I've been doing it this whole time. And it's great to get insights as well. Once I turn the mic off, I'll start asking you for some tips.
No, I think it's open, free discussion is fantastic. This is how our political discourse should be. Is by having open debates and not having censorship of ideas. So maybe my suggestion as a total amateur in this space would be like, pick a topic and get two people to debate it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, look, I did reach out to a couple of candidates from other parties before the election, and I thought, I'm sure they're probably being told that they can't do these things. And look, that was the other thing that I think is also interesting about, when you become a political candidate. People think that everything that you do is politically motivated, right? So now I've got to try and, it hasn't helped the podcast, unfortunately. It makes it worse, right? Because then people are like, I don't really want to come on anymore. Like I had a friend who said, because of your association with the party, I can't do it because, he has government contracts and things like that. And
interesting.
Yeah. And so, it was like, all right. So, otherwise he probably would have. And that would have been an interesting conversation. But, now that I guess, the election's come and gone, maybe things will have changed. But yeah, like the conversations don't necessarily need to be politically charged and doesn't need to have a direction. It's a conversation. So, I'll try and reach out to a couple of other candidates that were running for other parties and see if they want to come on and share their stories. And at the end of the day, as I said, irrespective of whatever things you believe or whatever team you're on, I'd like to think that we have a lot more similarities than we have differences, you know.
Yeah, refreshing.
Yeah.
That's great.
All right, cool. Thanks, everyone. If people want to read your works, where would they go?
It's a little bit hard. Well, I'm on LinkedIn and I'm on Twitter at Jamie1Coutts on Twitter and LinkedIn, Jamie Coutts. If you reach out to me on any of those in any of those platforms and you want to receive the research notes that I published on crypto, so I write about Bitcoin, Ethereum, and the wider ecosystem, then just send me a note and I will add your email address to my distribution list.
Cool. I'm going to do that. All right.
Yeah, cool.
Thanks, everyone.